because they had to get Grammy's birth certificate for her Social Security stuff. And at the time, she was living with us. Oh. So my mother got the birth certificate, and she was like, what? Yeah. So they list my grandmother. They list her father is Indian from Abenaki, her mother is Indian from Abenaki, and they list her as white. And when my mother went to Concord, she never was one to tolerate a whole lot. So she went ballistic. She went down there and she said to the woman, look at this. And the woman looked at it and she said, okay. And my mother said, how in the world do you have an Indian father and an Indian mother, both from the reservation, or the reserve as they call it in Canada, and you list her as white? And the woman drew herself up, according to my mother's story, drew herself up and said, well, I'm sure they thought they were doing her a favor. After all, your grandmother was a well-educated woman. Your mother, she was talking to my mother. Your mother was a well-educated woman, she said.
I think there is actually truth in that, though.
I'm sure there is.
If they knew, like when my mother and your mother were born, they were both listed as white, too.
Yeah.
My mother even listed, she didn't even think about it, she listed all her children as white, except for me.
Really?
And I'm the youngest of the four, so by the time I came along, it finally dawned on her, I should put this in here.
Yeah.
But they didn't think much of...
Well, I think, the Johnsons
and
were
of course,
going through something similar, having to make that decision and make that decision for their children, right?
But not only that, but the other piece is you have to remember, and this is the thing that I point out to people, because what you have to remember is that in 1900, because I've looked at the census for Keene for 1900, and my whole family is listed as Indian, okay? But I know families that we've looked at the census, and some of the people in their family are listed as Indian, some of the people in their family are listed as colored, some of the people in their family are listed as mulatto, and some are listed as white. And part of it was simply what time of the year they did the census. But the other piece is you weren't self-identified. In 1900, the government paid people to go to towns and say, look at these people, write them down and say what they are. Well, depend on the time of the year. If it was high summer and somebody was working outdoors all the time, you never know what people were going to get listed as. So I have a friend whose family members are listed as all of those different things, white, mulatto, colored, and what was the other one? It wasn't Indian. That was the killer. It wasn't even Indian. And I'm sure she did think that they were doing them favors. Every single one of them.
Especially, I think, in Keene.
In Keene.
Where this family had become accepted to some degree. Some people did and some didn't. But I think the ones that were in the municipal offices knew this family, and I think they really thought this would help them.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But that's what's so insulting about it. Yeah. If you get right down to it, that's what's so insulting about it. I'm sure they did feel like they were doing them a favor. But the reality is, it's erasure.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's all tied in part and parcel of that whole thing, let's solve the Indian problem by getting rid of the Indians. Assimilate them, force assimilate them. What's his face said, to save the man, you have to kill the Indian. Carlyle. To save the man, you have to kill the Indian. That's what he said.